I'm Jeremy Burton, CEO of JCRC, and I'm sitting here with Aria Blanchet, our producer, and we are talking about
Somerville.
Okay.
You went to testify last week at City Hall in Somerville.
Yes.
What were you testifying about? Why don't you take us back to 2025?
Sure. Let's back up. It's fair to say that while Somerville is not alone amongst some municipalities here in Massachusetts and around the country that have taken a particular bent towards expressly hostile towards Israel politics, especially after October 7th, Somerville has been a place where that's been a particularly dominant part of the municipal discourse over the last couple of years, including most visibly a referendum that was on the city ballot last year, in which a non-binding resolution about endorsing boycott, divestment from corporations that had some varying definition of interaction with the state of Israel, the government of Israel, the Israeli military, you can read it for yourself, was on the ballot and was passed.
Can you give folks a little flavor to what a non-binding resolution is?
I don't want to get overly caught up in the particulars of what happened in Somerville, but essentially they adopted a ballot referendum which basically said Somerville supports boycott, but it didn't say this is now the law in Somerville or it is now required that the municipality of Somerville take actions based upon that referendum. What's important for this conversation and what's important to why I was in Somerville on Thursday is that the significant part of the Somerville Jewish community has come together since October 7th in the last now almost 3 years to really become a much more organized and visible presence in Somerville life, that they were really experiencing even before this referendum, the hostility, the explicit hostility from members of their city council, from other people within the community, just to the normative Jewish life, and have been organizing to be visible, to go to council meetings, to have social events, to engage with Somerville's municipal leaders, including last year in the same referendum ballot cycle was also a mayoral election in Somerville. So they were engaging with the candidates for mayor and the person who ultimately was elected mayor, who himself did not support the referendum, and has continued to engage the new mayor of Somerville with the Jewish community, in positive ways, including a visit to Lair House, our favorite place, or one of our favorite places last month. Anyway, this has been an ongoing struggle for the community, and there's been a lot of hostility. And frankly, members of the Jewish community, they are tired, they're exhausted. I know people who've moved away. They're moving to other towns in Greater Boston because they are tired of...
You're looking at one of them.
The hostility. Yes. Looking at one of them who just got tired of the hostility just to anybody walking down the street with a kippah on, maybe. You have people who just got tired of being verbally assaulted in the streets of Somerville. I mean, you can speak to this.
I commend the folks who are staying there, who call it home, and who are trying to make it feel as much like their home as possible so that the Jewish community can engage in civic life and in public life. It's not the most comfortable place to be right now.
Yeah, I get that. And you're right. It's worth commending the people who stick it out. And part of a larger strategy approach that we as JCRC have taken, understanding that this is not the only municipality where this is happening, understanding that relationships happen on a very hyper-local level, is that we've seen and supported a number of emergent groups around the region. And this has been a partnership that we have had with CJP and with other Jewish agencies of saying the work is hyper-local, the leadership needs to be hyper-local, they need training, they need support, they need the network that we can back them up with. And I'll even go back a bit and say some of the people who are our regular listeners know, we've been having these fights over BDS in Cambridge for nearly a decade now. And our approach in Cambridge has been a little different because, first of all, it was the only place that was happening in the region when it first, was coming up about 10 years ago, although Somerville had a fight over 20 years ago.
It's become more fashionable in other towns.
It's certainly become much more prevalent and a steady stream of these since October 7th. But also in Cambridge, that's where I live. So my engagement personally as a resident and other people's engagement as residents sort of preceded the creation or still nascent effort to build formal Jewish community. Even while there is vibrant Jewish community, obviously we in Cambridge have several synagogues, a number of Hillels, a lot of other visible Jewish institutions, but we didn't have an organized network to engage City Hall until some of this had happened there. So Somerville, a group of people, including one of our former board members, Sam Gechter, other people like the now regional director of ADL, Samantha Joseph, and a whole bunch of wonderful people who I will not name because I don't know how public each individual chooses to be in this sort of setting, have come together. They've come together and they've created this organization, although it's not formally a 501c3 yet, called Shalom Somerville. And they're one of several groups around the region, some of whom we've heard from, for example, at the commission hearings, some of whom have been celebrated in other ways by the community. We've seen groups in Lexington, in Watertown, in Concord, Carlisle, for example, which I know we've talked about on this podcast before, all of whom are local residents saying, we need to do the grassroots work. We need to be in relationship with our neighbors. We need to be in relationship with our city councils to deal with these issues, to deal with rising anti-Semitism, hostility, the feeling of being othered in our own neighborhoods. Part of that strategy has been for CJP. There's been some micro grants to some of these groups. Part of that strategy has been joint work that we've been doing, and we haven't really talked about on the podcast before, where we've been investing in Jewish leadership initiatives to really support these people with training, organizing training, strategy training, how to do a campaign in a sort of political context. That we brought in crisis communications professionals to do training with some of these activists and building a network of them so they can learn best practices from each other. And this is something that's starting to take off around the country. And some of the activists from Shalom Somerville, along with one of my colleagues at CJP, have been out on the road beyond Massachusetts talking to other communities about how to replicate what we are already doing here in other states around the country where people are realizing the work is very, very local. All of which brings us to Thursday night. And as I said, there was this referendum. It was non-binding. It was adopted in Somerville last fall. And last week, two members of the city council, one of whom has been notoriously hostile towards the not anti-Zionist Jewish community might be a way of saying what his politics are about this. It's really hard I don't like to describe somebody else's, identity in these things, but he's definitely been hostile to that part of the Jewish community in Somerville that is not anti-Zionist, and has been one of the drivers of this process, introduced an order for the city council, essentially to move the referendum from non-binding to actual policy. Whether that policy could possibly be legal under state law, how that can be implemented in ways that don't violate various other laws is a different question that I know other people who are wiser than me about the law are discussing at this very present moment. But there was essentially an order which would be essentially to instruct a committee of the city council to come up with a law. I mean, it's very technical, but it's one step along the process of this continued hostile environment. Now, I should say we know this in the sense that we've been a part of the work in Somerville for a while now, and we've been supporting the local activists. When there have been city council meetings in the past, it's been a pretty toxic environment. Activists show up in support of this with extremely hostile rhetoric, even anti-Semitic rhetoric, directed towards other Jewish residents of Somerville who are either sitting in the room or in the hall or outside the building. There have been explicit reports of harassment towards visibly Jewish folks who showed up or people who showed up with anti-boycott sort of paraphernalia, identifying them. including explicitly anti-Semitic rhetoric directed at them. It's a really difficult place to be on these nights. And we saw some of this during the campaign last year, where we as JCRC both, along with, I want to say AJC, ADL, CJP, other organizations, both donated to the ballot campaign to support Shalom Somerville's efforts. And we at JCRC were raising money from donors to support the campaign, as were others, some of the others. So we've been in it all the way. And we get this call from our friends at Shalom Somerville and from a city councilor, Kristen Strezzo, who has just been an amazing, bold, proud Jew and proud, committed member of that part of our community that doesn't want to demonize Israel wholesale in these past few years, that they wanted me to come speak before the city council. And just to be clear, different cities have different rules. Somerville, you can only speak before the city council if you're sponsored by a member. So essentially, Councilor Strezzo was sponsoring me to speak to the city council for 2 minutes. This entire process has created a hostile environment, sends a message to a significant part of Somerville's Jewish community that they don't belong there, that they are not welcome there, that they are not safe there, and that their safety, their belonging was a priority for our entire collective Jewish community across the Commonwealth.
And a responsibility for the city of Somerville.
Yes. And so the message was not, and I say this going in knowing like there was very little possibility that the city councilors who have been obsessed with both demonizing Israel beyond criticism of Israel and frankly being hostile to their own constituents, we didn't seriously think that they were somehow going to change their vote on Thursday night, but we wanted to send a message. They're like, you have a moral responsibility. And what leadership, you as leaders need to be creating a society that is safe and belonging for all of your residents. And continuing down the path that you're on is not the Massachusetts way for building a pluralistic society. And we, the broadest collective of the organized Jewish community across Greater Boston, we see it, we see what you're doing, and we don't accept it. And that was the message that I hope we were able to deliver to them before they proceeded to send it to committee with only one objection.
Folks have been asking us what this could even look like in practice if this goes through.
I don't want to speculate about what it can look like in practice. There are other people having conversations about the legality of this that I don't want to say anything that might inadvertently impact that discussion.
Okay.
So let's just say, hey, folks, are you going to give up your iPhones? Are you going to give up like this, that, and the other? Because, but I had thought about like this question of where does this end? Because it doesn't end with an order. It didn't end with a non-binding ballot referendum. It's not going to end with whatever the outcome of this order and committee process in the coming weeks brings. And I don't mean that from a legal point of view, but then it's going to be, there are going to be fights over like this corporation or that corporation. And is that really like these folks are not.
They're not looking for a win. They're looking for something to do.
That's right. They are looking for something to do, and they are looking for a sustained campaign of demonization and hostility. That's what they want.
So there's always going to be the next thing.
There will always be the next thing.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that we will be back in Somerville, there and elsewhere as needed.
Let's talk about Iran for a bit. You think there's a deal?
Okay, I want to underscore, we're talking about this on Tuesday.
Okay.
In a moment where things can be changing very rapidly from day to day. What I would say is this: it would be foolhardy to opine on any agreement at this moment.
Okay.
There's a very tiny number of people, and certainly a very tiny number of Americans who actually read whatever it is that was, by the way, e-signing a deal. It's like we're now in the DocuSign age of diplomacy, whatever. And then, there are these comments from the vice president and others that like there are still changes being made between what they e-signed and what they're going to sign in a ceremony later this week in Switzerland. And only a tiny number of people have read it. So it would be extremely unwise to opine on whether this is a good deal, is it a bad deal, what are the commitments, what are the barriers, what are the timetables, what's yet to be negotiated, what happens if those negotiations over the next 60 days don't come to fruition. There's just a lot, and I think for the moment I'm sitting with the humility of no one's read the damn thing, and we need it to be out there so that, frankly, foreign policy experts, nuclear nonproliferation experts can read it and can opine on it, and that people we look to in a trusting way can say, this is what's here, this is what's not here, this is what makes it good, and this is what makes it bad. The only way you can have an opinion on it right now is entirely based on your level of trust in the administration in Washington. And that's a factor in these things. You either, you have to trust somebody sometime. And like, there are some people who just trust the president and they can therefore opine that like whatever he does is either right or wrong. And that's a factor, but I'm going to wait to like read it. But I do think that brings us to the more important thing. It's like, if there's an agreement that the United States has apparently already initialed, put it out there, release it. Not only release it, brief Congress. And it's quite clear that Congress has not been briefed on this. And I think that's the larger issue. And for us right now, it's like, what are some core principles and commitments we have that we can be naming and asking questions about? And I think of two. Number one of which is the transparency and disclosure and the role of Congress in our foreign policy. And folks will remember, I mean, it's like hard not to remember how divided American Jews were in 2015 over the JCPOA. That was the Obama era nuclear agreement with Iran. There was deep division in our community about that issue, and it was a very painful time for the community. Some people trusted the president. Some people did not trust the president. Some people trusted the Israeli government on this more than they did the United States government. All that was going on. But there was one thing that, at least for me, felt like a unifying aspect that there was broad consensus about, which was that Congress had to have a role. Congress had to be a part of the review of that agreement and the approval of that agreement. And there's two levels of that, one of which is, in this particular moment, it was important that there be a process that wasn't just a unilateral decision by the President of the United States, but really one that our broader political system was a part of an important agreement. And second of all, there's a real issue of America's place in the world and how we do foreign policy, which is different from how we do domestic policy, because our allies, our commitments around the world can't just be things that get overturned every 4 years at the whim of, whoever is in the Oval Office. Our strongest commitments come through long-term partnerships, allyship around the world. And frankly, like I've talked about this before, that's something that's been deeply shaken and, if not shattered, I think we will know in the coming years really whether it's shaken or shattered. But that sense that the world can rely on the United States to make commitments and follow its commitments is something that is far less stable than it was a decade ago. And if the United States is going to have credibility as a global actor, including in the Middle East, including in this particular situation, it's got to be something that's bigger than the presidency. It has to be part of a bipartisan commitment, maybe not to all the details, but a bipartisan commitment held by Congress to the broader commitments we are making as a society. And there's no question, again, not knowing what is in this, not knowing what is not in this, but there's no question that any long-term agreement about the Iranian nuclear program, about the various other issues that are coming up here are going to outlast this presidency. We're about 2.5 years out from a change in the White House. So Congress needs to be involved. So I think the most important thing right now is basically saying there are questions, there are commitments that various organizations and institutions have about various factors. But what what really needs to happen right now is that the White House needs to release the deal to the public, release the deal to Congress, and they need to go brief Congress. And frankly, we need Congress to insist on its authority as the first branch of government to be a part of this. And I think you're seeing some of that, and we need a lot more of that, and we need a lot more of that really fast. The second principle, and I was like, this is a little bit more of a observation of the moment, is the question of sort of Israel's space in all of this as a nation. And we don't have to belabor it here, the striking amount of public conflict between Israel's government and the American government over the last couple of weeks. And, I think it's been somewhat surprising for people who don't pay attention closely to see the President of the United States really just publicly name-calling and like saying that the Prime Minister of Israel is crazy in public, and then calling up President and say, yeah, I told him he's crazy. Like that's like a thing. That's kind of new. But the larger issue, and I think a lot of Israelis I'm talking to in the last 48 hours are sort of like waking up to, is, there's a phrase that you hear a lot in the disability advocacy community, and certainly comes out of that space and is more broadly familiar, which is nothing about us without us, which is to say that if decisions are being made about the us, whoever the us is, we have a right to be, we need to be at the table on those decisions. And a lot of Israelis are waking up in a world where Israel's government was very much not at the table over decisions about Israel's security, Israel's future, Israel's interest in the region. And that is probably shocking for many, surprising for a lot more people, place to be right now. There are genuine and legitimate concerns around things that we have been committed to for a long time, such as Israel's right to take preemptive action in its own defense, that at least by some reports appear to have been taken off the table for Israel in a room it wasn't in. There have been, it seems, based on the reports, commitments that essentially attached various conflicts and various pressure points in the region, including Israel's ongoing struggles with Iran's proxies in other countries like Lebanon, which, whatever your opinion about that, whatever your opinion is about the war between Israel and Hezbollah, and this is not to say our community is one mind about that, but the linkage of that to this is a new experience for Israelis. It's a new experience for those of us who care very much about Israel's ability to defend itself from threats from terrorist groups, including Iranian proxies. And it's a decision that has been made about Israel, seemingly without Israel at the table. And that is something that is new. All righty. Well, folks, keep sending in your questions, your comments, your requests for us to tackle topics, and we'll be back here soon.
See you next week.
Thank you, Aryeh.
Thank you.